keynote speaker for this evening. Justice Carrico was a member of the Virginia Supreme Court for 42 years, 22 of them as Chief Justice, the longest-serving member of the court in Virginia history, and the longest-serving Chief Justice. His achievements, awards, judicial temperament, and energy level have been cataloged and described elsewhere, and I'll not repeat them this evening. Instead, I'd like to highlight Judge Carrico's commitment to equal justice. Speaking at his retirement dinner, Justice Carrico challenged those present to continue his work to make Virginia's justice system accessible for all. He pointed out that there are many people who need our help, especially those folks, he said, who have little or no voice. Coming from Justice Carrico, those words were not mere platitudes. Instead, they reflect his deep commitment to public service, to justice, and to our responsibility to protect those less fortunate than ourselves. If you'll indulge me, one legal aid story that illustrates how Justice Carrico spoke through his deeds as well as his words. It was about 10 years ago, a legal aid program serving rural Southside Virginia approached the Chief Justice and asked for his help in recruiting pro bono attorneys. Of course, Justice Carrico readily agreed to help, and the legal aid program asked him to meet with local attorneys in Halifax and Franklin. So Justice Carrico got in the car, went to Halifax, no small feat in and of itself. The turnout was good. Chief Justice established his Southside credentials by noting that he was introduced to chitlins by Governor Bill Tuck on a weekend visit to Halifax in the late 1940s. Justice Carrico's polished and effective remarks about pro bono service were well received in Halifax, and in the weeks following his visit, pro bono sign-ups for the legal aid program jumped significantly. The Halifax meeting ended at about 4:30 in the afternoon, and the Chief Justice piled into the car for the drive to Franklin, where another reception, dinner, and post-dinner speech awaited him. Unfortunately, as is often the case in Southside Virginia, the drive from Halifax to Franklin took significantly longer than expected. Chief Justice tells me they got behind some school buses, if I remember correctly. Meanwhile, the local attorneys in Franklin passed the time waiting and waiting and waiting in the bar at the local Best Western Motel. So, needless to say, by the time the Chief Justice arrived, these lawyers were hungry and cranky, but shall we say, very relaxed. So following the Chief Justice's inspiring after-dinner speech about pro bono service, one attorney, perhaps emboldened by the long cocktail hour, jumped up and demanded to know who the Chief Justice thought he was coming down from Richmond to tell them what they ought to do. And then others chimed in with similar comments. In the face of this somewhat skeptical reaction to his speech, Justice Carrico, always the Virginia gentleman, listened respectfully, but he did not retreat one bit from his message about the bar's obligation to serve folks who have no voice. And he continued to urge all of those attorneys present to sign up for pro bono referrals from the local legal aid office. Please join me in welcoming a man of great intellect, compassion, and integrity, Chief Justice Harry L. Carrico.
Thank you very, very much. The trouble about that trip, it took so long, those people don't know how long it took to get from Halifax to Franklin. I was given an estimate when I planned my trip, and it turned out to be at least a third longer, if not a half longer than it was supposed to be. But it was a good trip. We were enlisting people to participate in one of the most important things that we're involved in the law. And that is to bring to every single poor person in this Commonwealth proper representation in instances when they cannot afford to provide a lawyer for themselves. So this is a great period of celebration for you. You have a lot to celebrate. This Poverty Law Center has done a magnificent job. You have every reason in the world to be very, very proud of yourself. But let it also be a period of commitment. A commitment to keep seeking that goal, to provide means and facility so that no poor person is ever turned away from assistance in the time of need. Now, I have a very pleasant assignment for you tonight. I think it's rather unnecessary, though. This guy's already known all over the world, so why does he need any introduction here? But I just want to tell you what a wonderful guy he is. Then I met David and Michelle at the Virginia State Bar meeting several years ago. He used to be a speaker. They sat then next to David and Michelle next to me. And both sides just, the friendship sparked right away. And we've become stronger and greater friends over the years. We're involved with them and their families. They both have wonderful families. David has a sister who's having a book published right about now. But they're wonderful people, and David's story is, I just think, one of those remarkable things that you will hear. Typical, though, of what can happen in this wonderful country of ours. David is a native of this area. He received a Bachelor of Laws in Political Science at VCU, then went on to that law school up the road at 64. Got his JD there. He interned with a firm in Richmond, and then he went to Washington and practiced law for 9 years with the firm doing litigation work and corporate work. Now, at this point, I want to let you know a little secret, and I don't want Michelle to know that. In those 9 years that he was with that firm, he led a double life. But it was a good double life. When he came home every night after working hard at the office, and the kids were put to bed, he would write until the wee small hours. Apparently he didn't write quite well enough during that period because I don't think he sold any today. But then came the blockbuster. And Dave hit it big. I've heard the story of how the bidding took place for the movie rights. David had told me, but he got up front for the book. He said, has to over what he got for the movie rights, so I assume it's a great deal more. Anyway, he has written 9 best-selling novels, which I think is a fantastic record. 9 consistently on the bestseller list. One of them in particular touched me. One called Wish You Well, which is the story of David's mother's first 17 years of life in Appalachia and all the hard times and difficulties they had to live. It's a sort of a book, certainly that's the way I felt, when you get through reading it, you feel good. Now, David, it's not that I feel bad when I read your other books. I felt like I'd been in a war. But anyway, David's success has been phenomenal. His book has been translated in 35 different countries. His books have been sold in 35 different languages. His books have been sold in 85 different countries. And he has sold more than 34 million books altogether. And I suspect if I think Dave's already got his papers for the mail. He's the fast bird. But I want to talk to you a little bit more about the man. We've been to a lot of book signings. And in the process, I've gotten to know not only the members of his family, but his friends, and even back some of his elementary teachers. And they all say that despite this wonderful success, it's not gone to David's head. That he's still the wonderful, warm, caring guy that he was before all this happened to him. But he does a lot of good. His being here is typical of what David is willing to do. He's just as busy as he can be, but he takes the time to do things like this. He's generous. He gives money where it will do good. He's involved in many charities. And some he takes very, very seriously. He is helpful in many, many things that I think most people never hear about. All in all, my friends, he is just a good, solid person. I'm so proud to be his friend, and I'm so delighted to introduce you to him tonight. David.
Might need a minute to recover from that, actually. Harry, thank you so much. Lieutenant Governor and members of the General Assembly, distinguished jurists, fellow attorneys, and other guests tonight. I have to say it's very ironic that I'm speaking to you tonight because I received an official notice from the Virginia State Bar today informing me that I had failed to notify them of my change of office address. I will rectify that immediately. I paid my dues. Yes, I paid my dues. I'm honored to be here with you tonight. It's not just an honor, it's a privilege for me to be here to help you celebrate such an important anniversary. And I applaud Poverty Law Center for all the good work that you do. I have to admit, as a first-year law student at that university up the road a bit, I volunteered at the Virginia Legal Aid Clinic to help people who couldn't afford legal representation, both students and citizens up there. My enthusiasm was boundless for the job. My intentions were good. However, I had absolutely no skill or knowledge whatsoever. And I think back to those days, and I trust that I did more good than harm, although some days I'm just not sure about that. Now, I'm asked by the media quite a bit when I do interviews. They say, you know, it seems like there are a lot of best-selling writers who are lawyers. And I quickly point out that there are over 1 million lawyers in the United States, and there are about a half dozen who write. And so the percentages actually are very low. The next question I get invariably is, well, is the practice of law good training for writing fiction? To which I always respond, some of the best fiction I ever wrote when I was a lawyer. It was good training. I've been writing since I was a kid. But practicing law in many ways does parallel the life of a writer. I worked on projects as a lawyer, 2, 3, 4 years they went on. You work on them a little bit and you think about it and you go back the next day and work on them a little bit. And at the end of the day, at the end of 3 or 4 years, you have something. Whether it be a trial that you win or lose, or a transaction that you close, or a book that you finish. Now, as I travel around the country, I'm also asked a lot, what is it like to be a novelist, a best-selling novelist? Really, what is it like? And I know the way they ask the question, the answer they really want is that I get up around noon, I put on my smoking jacket, slippers, I have a little dog that I hold. I go down to my immense study where an army of stenographers await me, and I just say things and they take them down, and then the books just pop out like that. But instead, what I answer is this. You have to understand that until my daughter was 3 years old, she didn't even think that I wrote books for a living. She thought that I signed them. Now, she must have passed this wisdom on to her little brother, because the first time I took my son to a bookstore, he was about 3 years old. We walked in this big Barnes & Noble, and his eyes grew really huge as he saw all these people and all these books in the store. And all of a sudden, he just took off running as fast as he could across this big Barnes & Noble, screaming at the top of his lungs, "My daddy will sign any book you have for $2. Well, that's what it's like to be a best-selling novelist. I don't charge the $2 anymore, but that's okay. Although, quite frankly, when I get back from book signings to this day, my son, who's now 8, he's still waiting at the door. How much did you make tonight? Why am I a writer? Well, I'm a writer because I love to read. And growing up in Richmond, Virginia, which even though I don't live here anymore, I will consider my home always, I would go to the library and check out books, and I would be able to visit every corner of the globe and learn about things and places I would never actually visit, but I would know about them because of the words. And as a novelist, all I have to entice you, to inform you, to entertain you, are little symbols on a page that we call words. Little printed symbols on a page. They don't sound very exciting when I say it like that. You know, we react much more strongly to visual stimulus and things that we can hear, not to little symbols on a page that writers and lawyers use every day in order to do their job. But if you put them together just right, it's an amazing effect you can have on other people. Now, reading is the only form of entertainment that we have, if you want to call it that, and you can, that demands your participation. You can't be lazy and read a book. You can be lazy and go to a movie. You can be lazy and go to a concert and listen to music. But when I give you a book, I only give you a template to do it. And you fill in the rest of it yourselves, using your own experiences and philosophies and opinions about things. And each person in this room could read a book and come away with an equal number of opinions about what that book actually represents. And that's why it's such a wonderful thing, because it stimulates all of you to think about things. Now, I started out as a short story writer. When I was at that law school up the road, instead of trying out for law review at moot court as my classmates prudently did, I was back in my apartment writing short stories. Because even though I knew I would earn my living as a lawyer, my dream was to write fiction. And that's what I spent my off hours doing, because that was my first love. And I got lots of rejections back on my short stories. You know, some of the nicer ones went something like, "We hope this finds a place somewhere." Meaning my story that I wrote with my blood, sweat, and tears. And then they went on to say, "Rest assured, that place will never be here." Or another one that said, "Sorry, but we only represent talent." I won't tell you the really bad ones. But what is rejection? We're all rejected in life. And as a writer, rejection means two things. Both of them positive. One, you actually wrote something and finished it. And for those of you who have tried to do so or have done it, you know how hard that can be. And secondly, you've taken something that's very personal, that you put your blood, sweat, and tears into, and you've sent it to a complete stranger to tear apart, as they often will. I think the greatest compulsion in life is to edit someone else's written work. Don't you agree? Well, the only way you lose when you're rejected in any way, whether it be writing or something else, is if it dissuades you to stop doing what you love to do. And the only way a writer loses by being rejected is if he or she stops writing. Now, from short stories, I moved on to screenplay writing. And I was practicing law in Washington at this time and working during the day and writing at night. And a friend of mine had gone out to Los Angeles to break into film as a producer. And he was there for 3 years, and like many others before him and since him, he came back without really making it. But he brought with him what was then an unproduced screenplay and asked me to read it and let him know what I thought of it. And I did so. I read it. My conclusion was, it was drivel. It was just awful stuff. It wasn't a story. It was just a series of disjointed vignettes. The humor was all potty humor. And the characters, there really weren't any characters. I was convinced no one would make this slop into a movie. You know, actually, Austin Powers went on to become an enormous hit. I'm sure no one here saw it, but anyway, it was a big hit. And I guess it showed I had no taste whatsoever in screenplays, but being a knucklehead of sort, I went off and started writing screenplays, and did so for 5 years. During that time, I made partner in a law firm in Washington, and I also got an agent in Los Angeles for my screenplays, which is very difficult to do because hardly anyone in Los Angeles knows that there is a state called Virginia, as I found out, and hardly anyone in the film community actually bothers to read anything. So I thought, you know what, maybe I'll have this second career aside from my law practice as a screenwriter, and maybe that'll be an interesting thing to do. Well, about that time, I'd finished my first novel that I'd been working on for almost 3 years at the same time. That novel turned out to be Absolute Power. For those of you who haven't read it or watched the movie upon it, was very, 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 very loosely based. I'll give you the plot right now. It's pretty simple. I think really the best stories are the simple ones that are layered with other complexities, but the underlying core story is simple. This story is fairly simple. The President of the United States, not a nice guy. He has affairs with other women, and this story has an affair with a woman. It goes terribly awry. There has to be a cover-up. Eventually the truth comes out. At the end of the novel, he's impeached by the United States Congress. When I wrote that story, it was entirely original. So I have to explain to everyone who's read it, since it's not based on any particular president. I wrote Absolute Power when George Bush the First was president, and it's certainly not based on him or anyone else. One of the interesting things about being a novelist, and one who travels as much as I do, invariably a curious thing happens when you have this many books out and you travel as much as I do. I generally see people in public reading one of my books, whether it be on a plane or a train, a hotel, by a pool. It just happens a lot. And I have one rule about that. I never go up to them. Ever. For a couple of reasons. One, I'm actually a very private person. I would never want to invade someone else's privacy. Just burst in upon them like that. And secondly, and more importantly, if they're not enjoying the book, I don't want to hear about it. Well, I flew into LAX very late one night about 4 years ago on a book tour. I was tired. I just wanted to grab a cab, go to my hotel, and go to sleep. As I'm walking to the cab stands through the concourse of the airport, I see this gentleman standing in the middle of the aisle, blocking the way. He has a luggage turned around him. He's reading a book, just standing there, reading a book at midnight. My first thought was, this idiot. You know, he's in an airport reading a book, standing, and he's not even sitting in a chair. Well, as I walk by, I look back, because I'm a writer, a lot of friends who are writers, I wanted to see what he was reading. He was reading a copy of Absolute Power. So then I sort of looked at the guy from a distance, sort of, vacillating back and forth. Should I? Shouldn't I? Finally, I thought this guy looks safe, so I walked over to him. And I said, boy, it looks like you're enjoying that book. And he never lowered the book, so I couldn't even see his face. He said, yeah, it's page turner, really good. I said, well, that's terrific. That's terrific. Would you like me to sign it for you? The book came down a little bit, so I could see his two little beady eyes staring at me. And he looks me up and down in a really unflattering way, and he says, no. I want you to write my book. So I took a step back. I felt stupid. I felt embarrassed. I said, sir, I'm so sorry. I actually have a rule about not doing what I just did. But I saw you there reading the book. You said you enjoyed it. I thought you'd like an autograph because I wrote it. He looked at me again and he said, no, you didn't. I took another step back. See, this is why I have the rule, right? I took another step back and I said, trying to be very calm and very pleasant about it, I said, well, you know, actually, Absolute Power is my very first novel. I'm David Baldacci. And he looked at me and he pointed a finger in my face and he said, listen, freak. You're not Baldacci, and just get away from me. Well, by this time, a small crowd had gathered around us. You know, I really am. Harry wasn't lying. I'm a nice guy. I'm a calm guy. But even nice, calm guys, we have our limits. It was midnight. I was tired. I was upset. So I said, excuse me to him. And I reached up and I snatched the book out of his hand. I turned around in the back. It was a hardcover. Put it up against my face. Big picture of me on the back of the book. And I said, do you see Buckaroo? It's me. So he looks at the picture, he looks at me, he gets this really stupid expression on his face. He reaches in his pocket, he pulls out a pen. He says, Mr. Baldacci, what an honor. Would you sign my book? I said, no, not signing your book. But I did. I signed this book. A couple more stories before I get really to what I wanted to say. In my latest novel, Split Second, there's an acknowledgement, the very last acknowledgement in that book. And there was a reason why I had to put that acknowledgement in the book. And the acknowledgement goes something like this. To all passengers on the Acela train going from Washington to New York, who might have overheard me discussing with various experts poisoning techniques for the novel and were probably scared out of their wits with my seemingly diabolical intent, I apologize. I'm on the train with my assistant Deborah going up to New York, and I'm sitting at one of those tables where you're sitting here, two strangers are sitting across from you, and I was trying to arrange an interview with a medical examiner in New York who was helping with various forensic technical things in the novel Split Second. By the way, if you didn't know, all the medical examiners in New York all try to get to the Bronx office, because I've been told by a number of them that the Bronx has by far the most interesting wounds. You can believe that. So anyway, I was trying to arrange an appointment with her when I got to New York. Unfortunately, she told Deborah over the phone that she was leaving the country in about 2 hours, and we'd be gone for a month. If I wanted to talk, we needed to talk now. I said, well, this is the only time you can do it, sure. So I took the cell phone and I had my list of questions, and I said, well, doctor, here's basically how I want to kill the guy. And I told her what I wanted to do as far as poisoning this man. And then I said, I have to be absolutely certain the police will never be able to discover it was murder. They won't be. Okay, good. But I wrote that down. And I said, now, during the autopsy, I have to be absolutely certain that the medical examiner will never be able to determine this person was even poisoned at all if they use the technique commonly used to kill him. Good, they won't. Good, good. Oh, perfect murder. Thank you. Thank you. Well, I wrote down a few other things, asked a few more questions, and ended with saying, well, doctor, I couldn't tell you. If I ever need to kill anybody else, I'm calling you. So I clicked off, put the phone down, finished my notes, and I looked up. This guy over here had spilled his coffee all over his shirt. This guy over here was just staring at me like this. So now you know, when you read the last acknowledgement, why it's in there. Now, I have a website. I never wanted to have a website because every author website I went to, I swear, if you breathed on the glass of the computer screen, your visa was charged for all of their books. That's just the way it was set up. I didn't want a website like that. So my website is very non-commercial. You can't buy anything on it at all. But you see a lot of the charities I'm involved in. We're linked to all of those. You see a lot of stories that I've written that have been published in newspapers and magazines across the world, but never published here, that you can download for free and read at your leisure. But I think it'll be a thought-provoking website for you. Now, the website's name is david-baldacci.com. And I had to put the hyphen in there because somebody bought my name on the internet as a domain name. And actually came to one of my book signings in North Carolina. He had 5 books for me to sign and a contract. And he offered to sell my name back to me for $500,000. He was a lawyer. He was a member of the North Carolina bar, actually. So this Virginia lawyer had a discussion with that North Carolina lawyer, and I chose the dash over the $500,000. So that's why it's there. Now, my wife and I, Michelle, have founded a foundation, a family foundation called the Wish You Well Foundation, and its chief initiative is to combat illiteracy both in the Commonwealth of Virginia and across the country. We fund existing programs, we help to create new ones, and we try to partner with other organizations really to help the cause. And that's why my being here tonight, I think, is very appropriate, because often illiteracy and poverty go hand in hand, as we know. I went to a high school. I often go to schools to talk everything from kindergarten to college. And let me tell you, the kindergartners are the toughest crowd. You know, I know addressing the Supreme Court is tough. 5-year-olds, maybe its own separate challenge, but it's tough nonetheless. But I went to a high school in Alexandria, Virginia, a high school that was the movie that Remember the Titans was based on. And I went there because they won me in an auction. It's actually nice to be won in an auction sometimes. I went to the school to talk to them about one of my novels, Wish You Well. 300 juniors and seniors in a very affluent area, good school. And I was told that these juniors and seniors love to read, and many of them had interest as careers in writing. Now I've got my own kids, so when anybody tells me anything about teenagers in particular, I don't believe it until I find out for myself whether it's true or not. So I went to the school, I went to a big auditorium with 300 kids, and I said, okay, before we start talking about the novel, let me ask you a few questions. Show of hands. How many of you really love to read? 5. How many of you would rather watch a movie than read a book? Everyone, including most of the teachers, raised their hand. Then I asked them, because Wish You Well was very much oral history, I said, how many of you know what an oral history is? None of them raised their hand. None of them knew what an oral history was. I was so heartened by this. I asked them one more question. How many of you think you're more independent in what you can do with your life than your great-grandparents were? All 300 students immediately raised their hands. And I was curious about this, so I asked one gentleman in the front row, why do you say that? He said, well, it's kind of obvious. We're the internet age. And with a click of a mouse key, I can have more information available to me than my great-grandparents had their whole life. I'm more independent because I know more. That's why. And I said, oh, well, okay, I guess I can see that. He said, okay, show of hands. How many of you use cell phones? Everybody. Show of hands, when it breaks, how many of you can fix it? No hands went up. Everybody use computers? Yeah. Hard drive blows up, how many of you can fix it? Nobody raised their hand. How many of you use the internet? everybody. When your fiber optic connection breaks, how many of you have the skill to tunnel into the earth, reconnect it? They have no idea what I'm talking about. I said, face it, guys. You're the most helpless, dependent generation in the history of mankind. You have a lot of information, but you know very little about things. I think your great-grandparents' generation drew every morsel of value out of the information, limited though it was, they had available to them. I talk about this a lot because I realize how important words and books have been in my life. As lawyers, as writers, I think we know that words are the greatest tools we will ever have because they represent the power of this as communicated to other people. All this information we have on the internet, yeah, it's amazing, raw tetrabytes of data, which are completely worthless unless we take the time to distill them into something of true value, like knowledge and even wisdom. We think in language. How deep can our thoughts be if our language is not up to the task? Truly, how deep can it be? The world today, I think we would agree, is filled with fear and hatred and violence and ignorance, largely because of differences in cultures, because of ignorance among people, and the intolerance that is spawned from that. Ignorance and intolerance are a lot like commas. You almost always find them in pairs. Rarely do you find ignorance without its devilish partner, intolerance. Now, people who don't read, who aren't informed about the world around them, where do they get their opinions from? Their ideas and philosophies about life? If they're not generated from within, where do they come from? Do they come from other people? Yes, they do. Are we then sheep blindly following the vision of others? Yes, we are. That blind dedication has been at the forefront of every man-made catastrophe in the history of the world. Most recently on 9/11. The greatest foe that we have of ignorance is knowledge. And the greatest tool we have in acquiring knowledge, I think, is reading, where we take everything that's out there and synthesize it through our own minds, not through others. We have a big problem there. The illiteracy rates in this country are staggering. I looked up in the almanac, the 2003 almanac, and it showed the literacy rate of the United States of America being 99.9%, which is a joke today. I would be amazed and stunned if it was above 60%. Illiteracy rates, those people who can read but never do, are even higher. 10 years ago, there was a national survey taken. It was found that 90 million adults, half the adult population in this country, were functionally illiterate, meaning they could bring either one, could not read at all, or two, could bring no independent thought to their task. Is that how we're going into the new century? 60% of inmates, 90% of juvenile offenders, 50% of the people in welfare are all illiterate. It costs this country hundreds of billions of dollars a year. It is the biggest problem we are confronted with. I gave the keynote speech at the Kentucky Festival of the Book last year. And in preparation for that speech, I asked the state to send me some statistics on Kentucky, and they did. And the one that stuck out, at least for me, significantly, was the fact that 1/4 of all households in Kentucky own not a single book. If you think Kentucky is at the bottom of the list, please think again. The most tyrannical countries in the world today have several things in common, as have all such regimes throughout history. No freedom of religion, no freedom of speech, no freedom of the press, and a hatred of books, and a hatred of those who create them. With all due respect to Shakespeare, when dictatorships come to power, they don't kill all the lawyers, or the doctors, or the bankers, or the actors. They imprison or execute the writers. And why is that? When you kill the writer, you kill ideas. When you kill the writers, you kill exchange of opinion. The democracy which we have in this country cannot survive with an illiterate population. It's impossible. And as Churchill said, democracy is the worst form of government that we have, except for all the others. Now, some may say that despite our falling literacy rates, that we will never lose the fundamental principles and freedoms of America. I say to that once you assume they will always be there, you have taken the first major step in ensuring their destruction. If we solve every other major problem that we have in this country, if we solve the issues that the General Assembly of Virginia is debating today, but we do not deal with and eradicate illiteracy, I am standing here telling you it will not matter. The America that we all know and love can no longer exist. I went up to Capitol Hill last year to speak on behalf of a literacy organization at Pennsylvania State University. I've gone to Capitol Hill before to talk. It was about literacy. And I wondered, how can I even make a dent? Much like our General Assembly is wrestling with very tough issues, obviously on Capitol Hill, they're wrestling with very tough issues. I've gone to our General Assembly to seek funding for libraries, initiatives for literacy, and I've always been warmly received. And I know that there's sincere support for libraries and reading programs and literacy, and I also know that the dollars are very limited. So I wondered, what could I possibly say to the gentlemen and gentlewomen on Capitol Hill that they had not heard before? So, in beginning my speech on literacy, I started talking about healthcare. I said, you know, I'm sure that you love books and reading, that you think literacy is important, that you love libraries, but I don't think that you think literacy is a top 5 problem or even a top 10 problem. Maybe it's in the top 20. Well, let's talk right now about a problem that I bet is in your top 2 or 3, and that's healthcare. Pick a number. How many uninsured Americans? 30 million, 50 million, 70 million? I said, let's say that you, Congress, come up with a terrific universal health care coverage plan. The President of the United States thinks it's terrific. He signs it into law. The monies are found to support this wonderful system. You'll still have 50 million people uninsured. And that got their attention a little bit. And they said, how could that possibly be? And I said, well, let's think about who these people are who are uninsured. Might they be at the lower levels socioeconomically? Might they be people who are literacy challenged? Might they be people who are either unemployed or work at very low-level jobs? So, they have universal health care coverage. A lot of them won't even be able to apply for it because they can't read and fill out the paperwork. Let's say they get a friend or family member to fill it out for them and they put their X at the bottom. They'll never go to the doctor or the hospital. Why? They can't drive. They can't even find the bus stop. They can't read a map. They can't read street signs. Let's say their friend takes them to the doctor or the hospital. They'll never take their medicine because they can't read the prescription label. A study was taken by Johns Hopkins very recently, and it showed when you have people who are literate and people who are illiterate, and they receive the same treatment regimen, the people who are illiterate die twice as much as those who are literate. But the people who took the survey found those results very confusing. They are abundantly clear to me. Congress did not give us the money, by the way, but I'm sure that they listened. Pick any problem you want. Poverty, that you combat here at the Law Senate, the loss of jobs, crime, prejudice, cultural ignorance, health care. If you solve illiteracy, you take enormous bite out of all of those things. Imagine just for a second your daily lives. You're all well-educated, hard-working people with important positions. Think of all the information you process every day. Think of the decisions you make based on that information. Think of the actions you take based on the decisions you've made. Now imagine your daily life doing all of those things without having the ability to read. Could you do it? Well, maybe you could, or maybe you couldn't. But the point is, you've imagined the lives of half the adults in this country. Now, the importance and power of words really can't be underestimated. My novel, Wish You Well, was chosen by the state of Rhode Island. It is the book that all Rhode Island reads. And I went up to Rhode Island probably 5 times over the course of the last year. And Rhode Island may be a small state, okay, but boy, when you cover every square mile of it, it's pretty big. And I went from libraries to senior citizen centers to schools, the Capitol. They made me an honorary citizen of Rhode Island. I went everywhere, talking and doing workshops, reading with kids. In one of these presentations, about 150 high school students who had read the book stood up and made presentations based on their reading and understanding of the book. And they were great presentations. One of them stands out in my mind. A student named Richard, who's this big, hulking football/basketball star. A junior in high school, when I first met him, Richard had never finished a book in his life. He had started some, but had never finished one. Wish You Well was the only novel he'd ever finished. The only book he had ever finished. At that presentation, a very timid, reserved, shy young man, even though he was very large physically, stood up and gave a very impassioned speech about what the book had meant to him, and presented me with an old baseball glove. He'd read the book, has great symbolism in the novel. He since read all of my novels and emails me frequently, and Richard has gone on to read books by writers far better, far greater than I ever will be. And that has changed his life. Richard is going down another path. But there are a lot of Richards out there. Which way they go depends a lot upon people like you and me. Now, if you're still not convinced about the power of words, let me tell you another book signing story. And let me preface it by saying this. I have signed books in 33 states and 15 countries overseas, and I think I'm qualified to make this comment, that people are shameless about what they will ask a writer to inscribe in a book. To Maria, at least we'll always have Paris, David. I've done that one about a dozen times. I even did to Peggy, at least we'll always have Pittsburgh, David. One woman came up to me and said, you know, Mr. Baldacci, I've heard that you write pretty much anything in a book. I said, well, ma'am, within reason, sure. She said, terrific, you made my whole life. Here's what I want you to write. To Debbie, I hereby give half my book royalties. I'm kind of thinking Debbie was a lawyer too. What do you think? I made a deal with Debbie. I said, you know what, I'll write it out, but I'm not going to sign it. There's one inscription request, though, that stands out, at least in the annals of my book signings. It was several years ago up in Northern Virginia. It was the last book signing event that I had after a 25-city coast-to-coast tour. It was right before Christmas, and I was dead tired. I just really, frankly, wanted to finish the signing and go home and spend the holidays with my family. There are a lot of people in line, last-minute gifts. I'm signing as fast as I can until there are only 3 people left in line. A guy who probably had 5 or 6 copies of various of my titles, and 2 women standing behind him. The 2 women are in their early 20s. They're together, and they have 1 copy of one of my books. And as I'm signing the gentleman's books, I'm committing the curse of the writer. I'm eavesdropping on that. 2 women. Writers eavesdrop all the time. I mean, what I've heard in this room tonight, my God. Anyway, you can read about it in the next novel. But these women, in my defense, these women were having a very interesting conversation. The woman holding the book whispered to her companion, that guy in front of us has a lot of books. Maybe I can use this as an excuse to get out of here. And I really like to hear that at my book signings. I'd rather they come up, you know, fawn all over me, get the book signed, and off they go. But her friend's response was even more cryptic and even more unsettling to me. She whispered back, you know you can't leave without getting that book signed. It's a matter of life and death. Well, I'm totally freaked out by this time. So the guy leaves and 2 of them come up. It's just me and them. There's nobody else left in the store. It's like midnight. They kept the store open to accommodate the line. And the woman holding the book leans close, plops it down in front of me and says, Mr. Baldacci, I've got a very, very special request for you. I said, well, I'm sure you do. She said, my name is Amy. And the person I want you to write the book to, his name is Tom. And she told me that Tom had heard me speak, had read all my books, really valued my opinion. She was going to give him a copy of this book on Christmas morning, and if I wrote in it what she asked me to, it would change both of their lives forever. She also told me that Tom had asked her to marry him 3 times. She didn't tell me what she told Tom on those 3 occasions, only that the poor fellow had gone to the well thrice with Amy. She said, here's what I want you to write. To Tom, Amy loves you with all of her heart. Amy would love to share her life with yours. Amy accepts your proposal of marriage. And then dear sweet Amy looked at me and added the immortal words, and whatever else you want to write. So Amy looks at me and she goes, you know, this is really important. I said, Amy, I can see that. She said, will you do it? And frankly, I thought about it for a minute. And I finally decided, Amy, I guess if you have enough courage to ask a complete stranger to write something like that in a book, well, hell, I should have the courage to do it. So I wrote everything that she asked me to write. And then something strange happened. It was like the Christmas spirit seized me. I kept going. I wrote down 1 page, I turned the page, I wrote down another page. I wrote 3 pages on Amy, a woman I didn't even know, bringing to bear all my gifts as a storyteller, a fiction writer, a wordsmith. And let me tell you, by the time I had finished, she wasn't Amy, a mere mortal woman. Hell, she was Saint Amy. Tom never had a chance after reading that. So Amy read what I'd written. She laughed, she cried, she hugged me, she gave me a kiss. She went off. And I remember calling after her, you tell Tom he's a lucky man, Amy, even though I have no idea who you are. And I started packing up to go home, and it occurred to me what I'd just done. And I started wishing very, very hard, please, let it work out. Let them be happy. Because, think about it, if Amy's not nearly as wonderful as I wrote that she was, and she ends up ruining Tom's life, Tom's coming for me. It's been 4 years since that book signing, and every subsequent book signing, a little piece of me is looking for Tom. And I hope he's happy. I want to congratulate again the Poverty Law Center on their 25th anniversary. I know the amazing work that you do, and I know my pleas about literacy and helping those who are impoverished and disadvantaged. I know I'm really preaching to the choir here, but I think the message is so important that if it affects one person out here who maybe isn't doing much with issues like this, and it makes that person do a little more, then I think it would have been worth it, and I thank you for enduring me. I would ask you also to keep reading and help others to discover the joy and power of books and reading. It has meant so much to my life, to the lives of my wife and my children and of my family, and it is simply the literal foundation for the quality of life that we all strive for, not just for ourselves, but for our children as well. Now, if you do that, if you keep reading and helping others to enjoy being literate, being able to read, being able to think for themselves, if you do all those things, I promise you this: I'll always be your friend. Thank you very much.